September 5th, 1944, 21,000 feet above Borneo. The sky was so still it felt painted, a canvas of endless blue stretched across the Pacific front. Below, the humid jungles of Borneo shimmered through a thin veil of morning haze, and above them a formation of American B-24 Liberators droned steadily toward their target. To their left, flying guard in his twin-boomed Lockheed P-38 Lightning, was Major Richard Ira Bong. He wasn't the loudest man in the squadron, nor the most imposing. At 5'6", with the calm, patient eyes of a farmer's son, Bong didn't look like the greatest American fighter pilot of the war. Yet inside that cockpit, he was something else entirely. A technician, an artist, and a predator who moved with surgical precision. His gloved hands rested lightly on the control yoke. Every vibration, every subtle shift in pitch was read like a pulse. He scanned the horizon, not with the nervous twitch of a rookie, but with the quiet confidence of a man who already knew how this fight would end. Then, a flicker. "Bandits, 11 o'clock high," crackled the radio. Bong's eyes locked onto a cluster of specks cutting through the clouds. Japanese K-43 Oscars diving fast from the sun. Their wings flashed silver, their intent unmistakable. He didn't flinch. He throttled forward, twin Allison engines roaring in unison, the Lightning leaping ahead like a released bowstring. The airframe shuddered as he pulled into a climbing turn, setting his trap. The first Oscar overshot. Too fast, too eager. Bong lined it up in the gun sight, a heartbeat of calm, then a 2-second burst from the P-38's 50 caliber machine guns and 20mm cannon. The Japanese fighter disintegrated in midair. He didn't cheer. He didn't need to. He rolled away, already seeking the next target, keeping his energy high and his turns wide. His wingmen could barely keep up. To Bong, aerial combat wasn't chaos. It was rhythm, a precise dance of momentum, speed, and angle. While others fought with adrenaline, he fought with geometry. Every kill was a solved equation, every burst of fire the result of calm, deliberate math at 400 miles per hour. By the time the last Oscar broke off, Bong had downed 2, possibly 3. The B-24s continued unscathed toward the coastline. He leveled off and took a slow breath. "2 confirmed," his voice crackled through the headset. "1 probable." The formation reassembled. Bong's P-38 Marge, named after his sweetheart back home, glimmered in the morning light, her painted nose art smiling under the Pacific sun. He just added to a list that now numbered well past 30 victories. But there was no celebration, no shouting, only silence, broken by the steady hum of twin engines and the same calm gaze scanning the horizon for whatever would come next. Because Bong knew something most didn't. Mastery wasn't loud. It was quiet, disciplined, and patient. He wasn't fighting for glory. He was fighting for precision, the same discipline that had once nearly gotten him thrown out of the Air Force. And 2 years earlier, over California, that lesson almost cost him everything. May 1942, Hamilton Field, California. The war was raging across 2 oceans, but for Second Lieutenant Richard Ira Bong, the front line was the bright blue California sky. Training squadrons buzzed overhead like hornets, P-38 Lightnings weaving graceful arcs against the sun. A spectacle of speed and youth. Bong, just 21, had arrived from Wisconsin not long before. A quiet farm boy who'd grown up milking cows and fixing tractors, he found himself among men who dreamed of glory and adventure. But what set Bong apart wasn't just his flying skill, it was his feel for the aircraft. He didn't fly by the book. He flew by instinct. And that instinct sometimes went too far. That morning, Bong had taken off for what was supposed to be a standard training sortie. Instead, he decided to show off. Banking low over the airfield, he pulled his P-38 into a sweeping dive that cut across the barracks, then rolled into a loop barely 50 feet above the ground. Windows shattered from the shockwave, laundry whipped off clotheslines, mechanics dove for cover as the silver lightning screamed past the hangars at treetop height. It was reckless, it was dangerous, and it was unforgettable. When he landed, the base commander was waiting, red-faced and furious. "Lieutenant Bong," he roared, "what in God's name was that stunt?" Bong stepped out of the cockpit, sheepish but calm. "Just testing her limits, sir," he said with that disarming Midwestern smile. "Testing her limits? You buzzed the control tower. You're lucky you didn't kill yourself or someone else." Word of the incident spread fast. Under normal circumstances, Bong would have been court-martialed, his career ended before it began. But fate, or perhaps luck, intervened. The report landed on the desk of General George C. Kenney, the newly appointed commander of the U.S. 5th Air Force. Kenney didn't see just another reckless pilot. He saw potential. "Send him to me," Kenney said. "I want to see this hotshot fly." A few days later, Bong was ordered to demonstrate his flying. He climbed into a P-38 and took to the sky once more, but not to show off. He flew clean, smooth, and precise, executing every maneuver with mechanical perfection. Kenney watched in silence, then turned to his staff. He said, "That boy has hands like silk." Instead of punishment, Bong received something unexpected. A lesson. Kenney didn't ground him, he mentored him. "Bong," he told him, "I don't want another daredevil. I want a disciplined killer. The war doesn't need showmen, it needs technicians. You can be one if you learn to control yourself." That conversation would define Bong's career. The farm boy from Wisconsin began to understand that mastery wasn't about flash or danger. It was about control. Every stunt, every maneuver, every kill in the sky would mean nothing if it wasn't repeatable. He left California no longer just a flyer, but a student of discipline, ready to test himself in the brutal skies of the Pacific, where the Japanese Zero reigns supreme. And by December 1942, Bong's first real test would come, over the steaming jungles of New Guinea, where the Japanese Zero reigned supreme. December 1942, above Buna, New Guinea. The air was thick with humidity and the scent of burning oil. Below, the green expanse of the jungle stretched endlessly, a maze of rivers and smoke rising from the front lines. The war in the Pacific wasn't fought over cities or fields. It was fought over jungles, ridges, and airstrips carved out of mud. Second Lieutenant Richard Bong sat high above it all in his Lockheed P-38 Lightning, twin engines thrumming in perfect rhythm. His flight was escorting a formation of B-24 Liberators heading toward enemy positions. The morning haze shimmered as sunlight flashed off the aircraft's polished aluminum skin. Then, like shadows appearing in a storm, they came. Dark specks, Japanese bombers, escorted by A-6M-Zeros closing fast. "Bandits! 11 o'clock high!" crackled over the radio. Bong's hands tightened on the control column. This was it, his first real combat. No instructors, no safety net, no second chances. Just life or death at 20,000 feet. The Japanese had ruled these skies for years. Their pilots were veterans, hardened men who had fought over China, the Philippines, and the Coral Sea. The Americans were newcomers. Most had never seen an enemy aircraft up close, let alone fought one. The Zero was a terrifying machine, light, agile, and merciless in a dogfight. Its turning radius could outmaneuver almost anything. Pilots who tried to duel it often didn't come home. But Bong remembered Kenney's lesson. Discipline wins, not daring. He pushed the throttles forward, the Lightning's twin Allison engines screaming as turbo superchargers roared to life. The P-38 surged upward, not to meet the enemy head-on, but to take the high ground. From altitude, Bong studied the formations below. The Japanese fighters weaved protectively around their bombers, but their attention was on the liberators, not him. He rolled the P-38 over, nose down, and began his dive. Wind howled against the canopy as the Lightning picked up speed. 300, 350, 400 miles per hour, faster than any Zero could follow. His gun sight aligned, the 450 caliber Browning machine guns and a single 20mm cannon in the nose forming a single point of destruction. He squeezed the trigger. A burst of fire erupted across the sky, and then a flash. The Japanese bomber's engine erupted in flame. Bong pulled up sharply, feeling the heavy G-force press against his chest as debris streaked past his canopy. No celebration, no shout, just a calm voice over the radio. Splash 1. He leveled off, eyes scanning the sky. Another Zero was climbing fast, closing from below. Most rookie pilots would panic, try to turn, to twist away, but Bong didn't turn. Instead, he let the Zero climb. Then, at the last second, he rolled inverted and dove again, the classic boom and zoom tactic that the Lightning had been built for. The Zero stalled, unable to match his speed. Bong curved back up, reversed direction, and lined up perfectly behind his pursuer. Another short burst, another explosion. 2 kills in his first mission. When he landed back at base, mechanics noticed bullet holes across his tail, close calls from the melee. But Bong didn't talk much about them. He filled out his report neatly, writing only, "Engaged enemy formation. Fired brief bursts. 1 bomber destroyed. 1 fighter destroyed. Return to base. Aircraft serviceable." It was the beginning of a legend. That night, under the humid air of the New Guinea camp, Bong sat quietly by his tent. Around him, other pilots drank, laughed, and boasted about their missions. But Bong said little. He was thinking about what he'd learned, that victory didn't belong to the boldest, but to the most patient, the pilot who struck first, from advantage, with control. The P-38 wasn't a showpiece anymore. It was a tool, an instrument of precision. And in the months to come, Bong would turn that instrument into a weapon of mathematical perfection. 1943-1944. Dobodura Airfield, New Guinea. The war in the Pacific had entered a new phase. Long-range missions, brutal heat, and endless sorties over unforgiving jungle and ocean. Pilots rotated in and out, but one name was whispered across every tent and radio shack: Richard Bong. By early 1943, his reputation had begun to spread far beyond his squadron. Mechanics spoke of his uncanny aim. Other pilots noted how calm he remained under fire. He wasn't the fastest or most aggressive, but he was predictable in the way predators are predictable: patient, efficient, and lethal. His P-38 Lightning, marked with the nose art, Marge, a portrait of his girlfriend back home in Wisconsin, had already become one of the most recognizable aircraft in the Pacific. Each morning began the same way. The tropical sun climbing over the mountains, the roar of twin engines cutting through the air, and Bong's Lightning rising from the jungle airstrip with perfect smoothness. He had turned flying into a ritual. Where others relied on adrenaline, Bong relied on rhythm. He flew the same way he hunted, silent, observant, waiting for the perfect angle. When his gun camera footage was later studied, intelligence officers were astonished. Most pilots fired long bursts, wasting ammunition and overheating their guns. Bong, by contrast, rarely fired more than a second. His hits were precise, devastating, and terminal. He had mastered the P-38's balance, how to ride the torque, how to avoid compressibility in steep dives, how to trim the controls just enough to steady his sights in turbulence. He treated the aircraft like an extension of his own nervous system. Major Thomas Lynch, a fellow ace, once said of Bong, He didn't fight the airplane, he became it. The Lightning itself was a marvel of engineering. Designed by Clarence Kelly Johnson, it was the first American fighter to exceed 400 miles per hour. With counter-rotating propellers that canceled torque and a turbo supercharger system that gave it unmatched high-altitude performance. But it also had its demons. A careless dive could send it into compressibility, the sudden, terrifying stiffening of controls as airspeed approached transonic range. Pilots who fought the aircraft in those moments often blacked out or tore their wings off trying to recover. Bong learned to ride the edge, to feel the resistance in the yoke, to sense when the Lightning wanted to fall apart, and to pull out just before that line. This was his secret. He didn't overpower the machine. He listened to it. By mid-1943, his kill count climbed rapidly. 10, then 15, then 20. He wasn't just surviving, he was rewriting aerial tactics. When he surpassed Eddie Rickenbacker's record of 26 kills in mid-1944, the press hailed him as America's Ace of Aces. General George Kenney personally awarded him the Distinguished Service Cross and ordered him home for a war bond tour. But Bong didn't enjoy the spotlight. Cameras, parades, and newspaper interviews made him uneasy. He wasn't fighting for glory. He was fighting because that's where he belonged, in the cockpit, above the clouds, focused on the task. After months of public appearances, Bong petitioned to return to combat. Kenney hesitated, but eventually agreed. When he returned to New Guinea, he was no longer a reckless lieutenant or a promising ace. He was something else, a man who had turned instinct into discipline and skill into art. Flying the upgraded P-38J model with boosted controls and improved engines, Bong refined his tactics even further. He emphasized teamwork, energy advantage, and above all, control. He told younger pilots, "You don't win by being brave, you win by being precise." By the autumn of 1944, the war had shifted north toward the Philippines. The jungles that once concealed airstrips in New Guinea were replaced by shattered cities, smoking coastlines, and the constant hum of American air power tightening around Japan's empire. Major Richard Bong, now a national hero, returned to combat reluctantly. His superiors wanted him alive. His image was worth more than another dozen kills, but Bong couldn't stand to sit on the sidelines. The cockpit was where his mind made sense of the chaos below. His P-38 Lightning, Marge, had carried him through more than 200 missions. Its twin Allison engines were like the heartbeat of an old friend. Mechanics noticed how gently he handled the aircraft. No abrupt throttle movements, no careless landings. Bong always treated his machine as if it were alive. In the Philippines campaign, he faced a new kind of sky, one crowded not by Zeros, but by smoke, flak, and sheer distance. He hunted alone more often, chasing bombers and intercepting formations before they reached the beaches. His precision hadn't dulled, but his instinct had grown cautious. He had seen too many men vanish in seconds. Still, the kills came, slowly but relentlessly. Each one was documented, verified, and radioed home. His tally rose to 40 confirmed victories, making him the highest-scoring American ace of World War II. And then he stopped. In January 1945, with the war's outcome no longer in doubt, Bong was ordered home permanently. The Army Air Forces had made its decision. America's ace of aces would not be allowed to die in combat. He returned to California a legend, yet a restless one. The noise of the jungle was gone. The silence of peacetime felt foreign. The skies over the Pacific had been his home, and now they belonged to history. By mid-1945, the war was reaching its climax. Engineers and pilots were testing new machines, jet aircraft, the future of aviation. Bong joined Lockheed as a test pilot, drawn once again to the sound of engines and the smell of fuel. On August 6, 1945, while preparing for another test flight at Burbank, California, Bong climbed into a P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. It was a sleek, temperamental machine, faster and more unpredictable than anything he had flown. Minutes after takeoff, the engine failed. Witnesses saw smoke trail behind the jet as it descended toward a suburban neighborhood. Bong attempted to eject, but the canopy release jammed. The P-80 exploded on impact. He was 24 years old. News of his death spread just as another, far more terrible explosion was announced, the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. One era ended in fire, and another began in shadow. To those who had flown with him, Bong's death felt symbolic. He had embodied the spirit of a generation that had learned to master the skies through intuition, grit, and human touch, qualities soon to be overtaken by technology. In his final report, General Kenny wrote, "He was the best kind of pilot, not because he loved to fight, but because he loved to fly." Bong's story was not one of recklessness or luck. It was one of control, of a man who met war's chaos with balance and precision, who made an unforgiving machine obey, not through force, but through respect. His P-38 Lightning, Marge, now rests in the National Museum of the U.S. Air Forces, a silent witness to the skies he once ruled. And in that stillness, his lesson endures. Mastery is not domination, it's understanding. In the quiet decades that followed the war, the name Richard Bong faded from headlines, but never from the annals of aviation. For those who studied air combat, he was more than a record holder. He was a blueprint. His method, his restraint, his unshakable calm under pressure became the silent foundation of American aerial doctrine. At training schools from Nellis to Maxwell, instructors dissected Bong's approach, his short, deliberate bursts of fire, his instinct for altitude advantage, his refusal to be baited into turning fights. He never wasted a bullet, one manual noted. He fought like a surgeon, not a duelist. In Wisconsin, his hometown of Poplar turned his boyhood home into a small museum. There, the glass cases hold fragments of his world, a worn leather flight cap, a letter to his sweetheart Marjorie, and a small photo of her face, the one he'd taped inside the cockpit of Marge. Children visit, staring at the faded black and white image of a young man smiling beside his aircraft, unaware that his name once struck awe into the enemy. Veterans visit too, and many of them pause not at the medals, but at the flight log. The entries are neat, measured, written in precise pen strokes. No dramatics, no boasting. Just missions flown, hours logged, and a tally of victories. Each line echoes the man himself. Focused, disciplined, silent. Bong's story became a parable within the Air Force. The idea that greatness in combat was not born of rage or bravado, but of composure and craft. His legacy was echoed years later in the calm professionalism of the jet-age pilots who fought over Korea and Vietnam, men who guided supersonic jets with the same patience Bong once used to guide his twin-boomed Lightning through the skies of the Pacific. Historians often call Bong's generation the last duelists, warriors who fought at eye level, who looked into the cockpit of the enemy before firing. After them came the age of radar locks, missile tone alerts, and invisible kills beyond the horizon. But Bong's mastery still resonates, even in the digital skies of modern fighter training. Every pilot who learns to control their nerves before a dogfight, every ace who values precision over impulse, unknowingly inherits his creed. In 2024, 80 years after his final mission, the P-38 Lightning Marge was restored, its polished silver skin gleaming again in the Wisconsin sunlight. As the engines roared to life, old veterans saluted, and the younger generation looked up, watching the twin contrails curl across the sky, a ghost returning home. And for a moment, it was 1944 again. The Pacific shimmered below. The world was young, and a farm boy from Wisconsin still ruled the clouds. Bong's lesson endures. Mastery is not found in glory. It's found in control. Because in the end, war is chaos. But the masters, like Bong, are those who make order of it.